Julie Flint, Chief Financial Officer to the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Okay. Aubrey?
Aubrey Williams, Research and Performance Officer for the Commissioner.
Gillian? Can you hear Julian?
The Deputy Chief Finance Officer.
Okay. And Sharon, although not on the screen?
Sharon Clark, Chief Finance Officer for the Chief Constable.
And are you there, Ian? You're not on the screen.
Oh, I am indeed. Morning, David. Apologies for being late, Chair. Ian Holderme, member of the Audit Committee.
Okay, I think that's everyone. So if we move on to the agenda proper, the agenda was structured with Jason being in attendance, and Jason himself had to leave. So, but we'll broadly try and keep to the agenda as set out, but maybe massaging things around to deal with Bill's availability as well as we go through. I do know that Mark, you have to leave after about an hour, but your items are early in the agenda anyway. Tracy, I know that you have to leave at 12:30, and Ian, I've already explained, you'll possibly be in and out during the morning because of other commitments. So if we can, and we will try and have a break obviously at some point in the middle of the morning. So if I can start on the formal agenda, then item 1, declarations of personal or prejudicial interests. Anyone got anything to declare? Okay. Apologies. We've noted from Bill, Jason, the Deputy Chief Constable, and I think John King can't be here today, but Caroline Horton's in the background somewhere taking the minutes for today. So if we can move on to item 3, minutes of the meeting of 10th of June, a long time ago. Are you happy I sign these as a complete and accurate record of the meeting? They seemed okay to me.
Yes.
Is that agreed? So I think that's
yes,
a virtual signature then in that regard. Can we move on then to first main substantive item, which is item 4, the summary of the action log. Do any of my fellow committee members have any questions or queries on the items on the action log?
David, I just had one regarding this. Yes, the collaborative issues. I understand there's various reports being prepared, but I think at the last meeting the DCC said that he'd be willing to come and give us an update as to where we are. I think that still is appropriate.
Yes, I think it is. So we're still basically waiting for a date for that to take place.
Is that something we can do, Julie, get a date sorted out to?
I think what we've been trying to do is to sort of tag it on to a normal meeting of the committee, and of course we've had a bit of upheaval around the dates, haven't we, over the last few months, you know, with things not going ahead. So I guess really, without wanting to pass this on, I think it's really for Gillian, you know, when she's setting out the dates and what's being done at each meeting, to make sure that that's on the agenda going forward.
Can we tentatively say that we try and do it at the January meeting then, either as part of the meeting or as something before the meeting?
Absolutely, we can aim for that, and you know, see if people are available to do that. We'll do our best to make that happen.
Okay. Does anyone have any other issues on the action log? So just it's more a comment from me, is that it's pleasing to see, and we come to it later on the agenda, that a great deal of progress seems to have made on the integrated assurance map, which is something that's been outstanding for a while, and that's quite pleasing to note that. I'll have that recorded. So if we've no other issues, then can we move on then to agenda item 4, internal audit, and there are 3 items there: annual report for last year, progress for this year, and the Internal Audit Charter. So Mark, do you want to take us through the annual report for 1920?
Yep, absolutely, Chair. Obviously, in a normal timetable of events, you would have had this report before now, but obviously this is the annual report for year end 1920. Pleasing to be able to kind of report to yourselves that obviously per the head of internal audit opinion that was provided both the Police and Crime Commissioner, Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, and the force itself, you know, adequate and effective controls and governance process throughout the year, which is pleasing. Per kind of page 3, we've just kind of highlighted as part of that opinion the audits that had some weaknesses and limited audit opinions, and we've kind of split those out in terms of the areas across the Commissioner and the force. So that's why you'll see, for example, we make reference to Commissioning and Victims Code under the PCC because they're relevant areas to them, and then on the force side it was obviously the recruitment but Victims Code as well, because that's one that splits across both areas. Moving through the report, we kind of just provide some information on how we've kind of drawn that conclusion. I think the comparative table on page 5, where we look at kind of overall opinions in 1819 and 1920, obviously it just shows a slight uplift in kind of 1 limited opinion last year to 3 this year, but I wouldn't be kind of too disheartened by that. I'd say as a committee, I think it kind of helps show that we're looking at the right areas. It's not necessarily a bad thing to have a number of those. And again, I don't think it's a high level or percentage as a whole of our entire internal audit plan. So just wanted to kind of draw your attention to that as well. Other than that, there was nothing else within the report that I wanted to specifically draw the committee's attention to. So maybe happy to just pause there and take questions if that's okay, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from panel members?
Chair, can I just, are we going to tackle individual reports, or do we want to just wait for a little while? How do the guys want to play that?
I don't mind if you want to deal with them now. That's fine, but
yeah.
Just on the procurement report, then. Sorry, commissioning report. Excuse me. It's one of the it's my little bugbears really when it comes to internal audit reports on page 12 of the report of the say it's the first recommendation. When we talk about documentation of how the justification decisions have been raised, it's the exposure of the testing. So I've got no context about whether I should be worried or not worried. I know it's obviously just a significant finding, but when somebody says significant, then we've not justified or documented the justification piece. I'm just trying to understand the exposure during testing. How many did we sample? How many were missing? Was it prevalent? How big a scale of an issue did we have?
Have we skipped forward here to because the details for the commissioning report as part are kind of included in the progress report.
That's what I'm sorry, that's what I'm saying. So when it talks about particular reports, that's why I was just asking.
No, sorry. Can we deal with the annual report?
No, right. No, the annual report is fine.
Yeah. I mean, the one issue in the annual report, I don't know whether we have a discussion here or later under outstanding actions, is the recruitment follow-up on the 2 matters, which I know, Bill, you have particularly exercised about, the ex gratia payment and the bonus payments. We seem to be at an impasse on those, and I just wondered if there's any way in which we can take these forward. I know they were within the remit of the governance group, but the governance group hasn't been able to meet for the last few months. I don't know if either Mark or Bill want to say anything about progress in that regard.
I think.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We had a good discussion on this topic yesterday with Mark, and the draft follow-up report, which includes those issues, is in the process of being finalised and would be available for the next JIAC meeting. Okay. And certainly, I'm assuming would be available for circulation before that meeting to give people sight of it. For the record, I should sort of state that the legal advice that I've had, that I've made known, is that describing the payment as an ex gratia payment is incorrect. It was a legal settlement in relation to a civil action, but all of that is contained within the report, which is currently in draft form, and will come back to this committee for formal consideration at its next meeting.
Okay.
Hopefully progress will be shown to have been made.
Okay, well, thank you for that.
Can I just ask? Oh, sorry. Can I just ask that in that meeting, in that report, will there be details about the processes being introduced, or will that be dealt with separately? So what I'm more interested in is not what's happened in the past. Well, I am, but what I'm really more interested in is what's going to happen in the future. Have new processes been put in place to make sure that all the boxes are ticked in the future? Is that in that report, or is it something else?
I can kind of perhaps answer that in a way, because that
would be good. Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
obviously in regards to an ex gratia payment, I know there's still some discussion over the past one. Obviously the process was that for an ex gratia payment it should be authorised by, there's obviously delegated limits within the regulations, and as part of that there's Sharon might be able to jump in here, but they've introduced an extra step, I think, within the T-Police system, where that authority has to be done there. So the control for a specific ex gratia payment going forward has been addressed, as far as I'm aware.
It has. Okay. We've already put the process in place.
Yeah.
Okay, that would have been helpful just to have clarity on that in the update on the summary of recommendations. Just then I wouldn't have needed to ask that question. Thank you very much. That reassures me. Thanks, David.
And just for clarity, we've already followed up this report in part of 2021. It's just a bit of a timing issue here in terms of this is obviously year end 1920. So like I said, hopefully at the next iteration, as Mr. Skelly rightly said, there'll be a further update.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Okay, can we move on then, Mark, to the current year's progress report?
Yeah, again, I suppose a bit of a timing issue with this one, where we had to finish the update from 1920. So in the first part of the report, just kind of informing the committee that we've finalised all the reports for 1920, which we did a lot earlier in the year, back in kind of July, just after the June meeting. So those reports are obviously included within the pack. In terms of progress for 2021, I think it's, I've highlighted to the committee that we're making good progress on the plan. Completed 4 pieces of work to date, which include an additional request as well. I can also update the committee a little bit further to say that we've managed to arrange at quite short notice. I had some availability of staff, and the force have been great in accommodating an audit at short notice as well. So with the fleet audit as well, is being kind of squeezed in at the last minute as well. So progress is being made, but I think it's just prudent to highlight that obviously we're fastly approaching the end of the year, and then it's going to be quite a busy period for everyone's year end between now and the 31st of March. So there is a possibility, probably a stronger possibility, that 1 or 2 of the actual audits as part of the plan might not be finished by 31st of March, but obviously the plan will be to complete it shortly thereafter, so perhaps just into April. So just wanted to kind of make the committee aware of that. Plan to have some discussions with Julie, Sharon and Gillian as to perhaps if they want to go with a priority based approach as to making sure ones are done within the year or just after, but hopefully that's not going to cause too much concern.
Can I just ask there, do I or the committee, or maybe me under delegated authority, have to approve the rescheduling? Because I have in the past had the odd email about a bit of work maybe being delayed or what have you.
I think it'd be worth I'm not sure it needs to be formally done or documented, but I certainly want to keep you, obviously, the committee updated and informed. And I think once we've perhaps got a timetable for the remainder of the year that we'll work with Gillian from kind of January onwards, it'd be useful to share that with you. I think Gillian's got a hand up actually.
Thank you. Right. Any queries? I think you had, and this is a bit Ian for you. Was it on procurement or commissioning? You're on mute, Ian.
Sorry, try my best not to. I've got mobile phones going off as well at the same time. Mark, I've got 2 things really about that execution of the 2021 plan, which is under normal circumstances, coming up with an annual opinion is going to be challenging anyway. Completing it and not getting it there, there's going to be, I've seen a lot of internal audit annual opinions where they have had to really caveat what they can give assurance on and what they can't give assurance on. So just flagging early, if that's going to be the case, can you let us know early, please? The second thing is that In terms of, again, internal audit plans, there's nothing worse than chasing down an internal audit plan you planned 8, 9, 10, 15 months ago, especially in the current world. What is there any of the subjects that actually looking back and working with the force that actually you're thinking actually we should put this on, and it means getting rid of something else, because actually that would be better value and more assurance to the force at this stage?
Like I said, I do have regular discussions with Julie and Sharon. I think the plan's still appropriate, to be honest. They are all risk areas that
don't get me wrong, I think there's still risk areas. I'm asking for if there's anything that's actually better value. So there's nothing wrong with what's on there. What I'm saying is, should we be looking at something else and being a little bit more agile? That's my question.
I think certainly for next year's plan, that will be the case. Where there's been upcoming issues, I think obviously the move to remote work is going to affect the control environment across a number of areas, and that's probably going to come out through the planning discussions that we have early part of next year. As to, well, actually, we found that in this remote world, we've struggled to kind of maintain some of the kind of controls that might be in place, or we've had to adapt to the control environment. So until we have those discussions, I think they'll be the more specific areas. In terms of areas that I can kind of advise on, I think lessons learned from COVID is kind of like the kind of key thing in terms of, well, you know, we've now had to deal with this for a prolonged period. What do we need to, what's worked, what did we do well and what didn't we do well, and can we take that forward? So that's kind of a piece that I think should be part of next year's plan, really.
Could I challenge you, Mark, on that, please? Because I think my concern is that by the time we go through the planning process and we start doing work, we're going to be looking into May, June, July, especially if you're playing catch up on this. And we're almost into halfway through the year next year, as opposed to being sitting in November. That sort of stuff for me at the moment about where the control framework has fundamentally changed needs to be assessed now and make sure that we aren't leaking stuff, because that's another 6 or 7 months of potential leakage if we've got problems. I get the fact it needs to go onto the plan, but this is why I'm challenging us not to try and keep chasing this audit plan if there's a problem now. There are certain control, as you say, certain changes that are being fundamentally adjusted. And also when you start seeing things about whether people are being able to get internal audit assurance and direct evidence. So I think I'd kind of chair, if it's all right, my challenge back to both the business and internal audit is to say, we can't wait to next year's plan to work out if there's been a fundamental shift in the control environment because of remote working. That piece of work needs to be assessed right now, and then let's have a look at what that means in terms of assurance, please, because it's too late.
I'm happy to kind of have those discussions with Julie and Sharon in the shorter term to see if we can, if any changes need to be made to the start of next year. I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. Sorry, Julian, Merry Christmas, but yeah. So, but I've just seen it. The problem is that people, I've seen that in too many businesses, and they're waiting, and it's a problem. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions, queries on the progress report? Anyone? Can I just ask then, Mark, on page 16, which is the collaboration health and safety report, recommendation 1 is really a presentation thing. I don't think it has anything other than the actual finding. It doesn't, to me, seem to have a response or a time scale. Or am I missing something? It's like there's some words missing.
It's specific to the, it was specific to the OHU unit, and that was their response in terms of the health and safety procedures that they aligned to with Leicester.
Okay.
I mean, just to say, we're not part of that collaboration. I mean, it's here because it's of interest,
right?
But it's not a risk area for Lincolnshire because we're not part of that collaboration.
Okay. There's nothing else then on that part.
David, sorry, Chair, may I just ask one more question?
Yes.
That's right, just which is the commissioning one. Is there anything we need to be worried about, Mark? Because like I said, is when we've not documented the justification of decisions, which was the finding on page 12 of your report, recommendation 1. Was there anything for us to worry about when we went back? Could we find it? Did we get the justification okay, or are we still missing stuff?
I think it was a case of documenting that we have those, you know, the discussions with the OPCC, and Julie can kind of back me up here, but those discussions were had, and I think there was, you know, work done. It was more around the documentation, and we talked about how we published the decisions and things, which That's why we, I think we did this piece of work quite a long time ago now, and I think things have changed quite significantly since then. And I'd like to think we're in a lot better place now, and Julie can probably add here.
If I could just come in on that, Chair. As Mark said, we've had sort of a number of discussions about this particular audit, sort of getting clarity on what the risks are. And from my perspective, I think the whole sort of commissioning landscape has evolved over a period of time, and what we need is a sort of a stop and a review so that we get on the front foot rather than responding to particular needs. And that's the intention with developing the commissioning framework, which will set out very clearly, what the landscape is and what the approach is to commissioning services in particular areas of that landscape. So that, we're really clear, is there a marketplace here? Can we go out to procurement, or have we got to sort of help the market to get to maturity by having grant aid and that sort of thing, and setting out all of those considerations across the whole, as I say, across the whole landscape in advance of commissioning activity is where we want to get to. And then once the commissioner has approved that framework, then there will be delegated activities that can be addressed by officers without having to come back for a formal commissioner decision, because it will be a delegated activity.
Perfect. Thank you, Julie.
Okay, thank you. Can we move then on to your third paper, Mark, which is review of the charter, the annual charter?
Yep.
Are there any fundamental changes?
Not at all, Chair. There's no fundamental changes at all from last year, other than our new Mazars brand, which I'm sure you'll all tell me how good it is. But no, there's no changes specific to the audit charter there at all, Chair. So it's just kind of there for reference and refresh and update to remind the committee.
I have nothing to do. Any of my colleagues have any questions? Ian?
Yes, please. So just on page 3, third paragraph, and just because I know one of your peers who shall remain nameless screwed this up, in terms of protecting, safeguarding and confidential documentation in the course of the duties, it's not just our processes that have changed with COVID. Obviously, the auditors' processes have changed as well, and I don't think they'd fully checked and adapted that the confidentiality security of documentation was being executed. So are you comfortable that the Mazars processes are now fully reflective of the new world that we live in?
Yes, we've put a arrangement in place between ourselves and the force as to how they will share information via a secure portal with the right security in place. So I feel
great. That's great. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay. Thank you for that. Can we then move on to item 6, which is internal audit reports implementation progress? I think it's really a question of, again, do colleagues have specific issues? We've had an update on the recruitment report, which includes the ex-gratia bonus, so we can wait further detail on that at our next meeting.
David,
is there any other questions? Jim?
Just pick up one other aspect of that. The chief referred to the solicitor's advice on the legal settlement, and that's fine, that's been progressed through. The other issue which came up in the governance group, and I'm not sure if that is being progressed, is the question of this non-disclosure agreement and what limitations there may be in terms of the Chief Constable sharing information with the Commissioner. Is there any progress on getting that clarified?
Bill?
Sorry, Jim, could I just could you clarify the question? I mean, I'm very clear on it. Essentially, there is no blanket authorization for anyone who is not the employer, i.e. me, to have access to personal information or information that I've entered into as part of a legally binding agreement. So there's no blanket authority that gives someone else, whether that's the Commissioner or anybody else, access to that information. It has to be on a kind of case-by-case basis. The position of the force, i.e. the position of me on this particular issue, has always been if the information that's being sought is put in writing in detail, then I can assess it against the legal obligations I have under the Data Protection Act and the obligations I have in the confidentiality agreement. That hasn't taken place. So I'm pretty clear as to the steps that need to be gone through in order to arrive at a position of resolution. The escalation of that clearly would be if someone is asking for information which I feel I'm legally bound not to disclose, then that can be challenged. You go to a court and you ask them to overrule the one legal obligation with another. Again, so there is a route through it, and I'm pretty clear about the steps for it. So I'm not sure, was there a particular part, of what you've described that you feel there's further clarity required on?
I think it might be just a matter of timing. The last time the governance group met back in March, perhaps the issues hadn't been clarified to the extent which you have just done now. For example, I hadn't appreciated there was the possibility for a commissioner who felt he was entitled to information to actually go through to the courts. But it is important there is a route, because I fully understand any chief's personal obligations in relation to disclosure, and there's also the statutory duties on behalf of the commissioner to hold the chief constable to account, and there is a tension between the two potentially, and I just hope it's going to be clear going forward, not necessarily even just for Lincolnshire, but is there a nationwide issue where there might be a need for clarity, or is it all actually well understood by those engaged in the process?
I mean, my feeling is that it, generally speaking, is well understood, and that the actual process itself hasn't been tested to show that fails. I think there has been some misunderstanding, and there's been some information that's passed between us that hasn't been as clear as it should be. I think the framework and the process is there. It's just that we haven't, through our own failings, followed that through to its the conclusion it should be. So no, I don't think there's particularly wider implications for this. I will endeavour to do my best to explain that in the report that comes to you next time, to show you that we have considered whether there's any changes that are required. You've heard some already in relation to technical changes with the system around the authority levels, but I'll try and explain how the framework should work, and that next time round that's the way we should implement it.
That'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Anything else on the action log?
Can I pick up the next item as well? Collaboration, strategic planning. The original timescale was April 2019. The September update said the CFOs have agreed a form of words that will apply, the trigger point being late Q3, i.e. about now. But then it says final writing has been delayed, even though they've agreed the form of words. Will be completed by 31st of October, and the revised timescale for implementation is next April. I would have expected, as a minimum, the revised timescale to be today. I don't know if Julie's got a comment on it. It just seems to drift.
Yes, I mean, I think I suppose my comment is that there is a move to getting the chairs of the regional audit committees together to discuss some of the challenges with coordinating these regional audit reports, because the system as we've had it thus far is that one force, one authority will take the lead on a report. So the lead on this particular report, I think, is it Nottinghamshire, Mark, just from memory, I think, or is it Derbyshire? I can't, it's Nottinghamshire or Derbyshire is the lead on this report. And what we do at the moment is, rather than commissioning a specific update for each committee in terms of the action, each committee takes the update that was last provided. So that's probably why there is a mismatch here in terms of the date and so on. I mean, it sounds, you know, it's a really sort of bureaucratic explanation, and what it's trying to do is to, you know, be able to manage these audit reports for the information of 5 different audit committees.
That's helpful explanation, but could someone check and make sure that the final wording is actually issued by the end of this quarter, i.e., you know, by the end of December rather than the end of April? You know, if you haven't got the environment sorted out.
Is this the this is the carry forward one,
yeah.
is it? Yes,
yeah.
As far as I'm aware, I think certainly CFOs agreed at their last meeting. I can't remember whether Sharon was at the meeting or not, to just confirm this, but at the last meeting a week, 10 days or so ago, we agreed between us the final form of words, and that will go to the next PCC and Chief Constable's board for agreement. So it should be sorted by the end of this calendar year.
Right, okay, thank you.
Can I just say to my fellow committee members, I should have probably said in a briefing session, there is date canvassing going on at the moment for the 5 regional chairs of the JIACs to meet in December. So these are the sort of issues we'll discuss, and it's under the Mark and colleagues in Mazars are coordinating that. So that will be useful as well. The five chairs in the region have a session remotely, of course, at the present time. Any other issues on the action log? Okay. Can we move on then? We know then.
Sure. Could I ask that we did items 8 and 9 next, which would allow me to.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask Bill whether that'd be okay. So I have to formally say we're now going into private session, so the recording will stop. Move then back into the public session, and go back to agenda item 7, which we passed over earlier on, which is review of compliance with the governance arrangements. A standard report just highlighting some of the key decisions that have been taken over the period since the last meeting. Does anyone have any questions or comments on the range of decisions outlined there?
Yeah.
Jim?
I had one, I'm just trying to find it. Sorry, business. The very final one.
Yeah, got there first.
Yeah, there's no web link or anything. I mean, was it just a procedural issue? There was no contract, or was there something more substantial? Were we driving around in a vehicle that wasn't insured or whatever? Or?
It came to light when I was asked to write off the value of the vehicle, because what happened was the vehicle was destroyed. It was damaged beyond repair, and so at that point it was trying to, you know, establish what the basis of this vehicle was, etc. And obviously we found a weakness in controls there that we will be addressing going forward.
Can I ask Julie, when did we get this vehicle? If we wanted to, I mean, how long have we had it? We just broke it within a few weeks, or just? Well,
just to say, it is normal practice for car manufacturers to lend police forces vehicles. Okay. That's entirely normal practice, because it's one of the ways that they they show what their vehicles can do, etc., etc. And what we discovered was that you know, in carrying out this perfectly normal practice, the appropriate controls weren't in place, because you know, we ended up having to agree the value of the vehicle after it had been destroyed before we you know, we took it on. I don't know, Sharon may have been closer to it than I was. Is there anything you will want to add, Sharon?
No, I think what we identified was a weakness in our procedures, and the relevant people knowing that the hire was going on and checking out the insurance arrangements. We've now corrected that, as you say.
Sorry, Could I just check, was this a hire or a loan? In other words, were we paying any amounts for this, or were we just being lent to Tesla?
It was a loan.
Okay. And I presume it wasn't a Tesla, because I'd be very, very upset at this point in proceedings. Just checking.
No.
And, I mean, just an observation, this perhaps strikes me as something, again, if it's widespread throughout the country, the National Procurement Group have got a vehicles arm, could perhaps come up with a sort of standard arrangement, because I can see it is actually different to me going to the normal garage and asking for a car for a day to give it a run, because obviously it's a higher risk of write-offs in collisions, etc. So I can imagine it's quite complex to actually get the legals all sorted on this, so there might be value in getting it done nationally.
Okay, thank you. Are we happy with that report then? Okay, shall we then now take a 5-minute break? For Helen's purposes, we felt, Helen, that when we come back, it may make sense to take agenda item 13 before agenda item 12, given that 13 was 1819 and 12 is 1920. So if we could deal with 13 next and then move on to 12. That's okay. Right. But if we can take 5 minutes now, come back about 11:30, certainly on my clock anyway.
Thank you.
Ella, could we go to item 13 next? Just logistically, it seemed to make more sense to talk about the 1819 audit before the 1920. So Helen, you're down to give us an oral update on the annual letter for 1819?
I am, Chair, that's right. The intention was to bring the annual audit letter today, but as members are probably aware, the annual audit letter marks the conclusion of the audit, and unfortunately there's a couple of matters that remain outstanding, which mean that the audit can't be signed off just yet. If I just run you through what those items are, there's 3 in total. First and most minor of which is that a decision was taken to make some updates to the narrative reports that accompany those financial statements, and those are actually in your packs today. We have a requirement within our audit opinion to commentate on the consistency of written information that sits alongside the financial statements. So we'd need to review those changes and be happy with them. The bulk of that work is done. Nevertheless, there's a timing issue. The second point is that during the 1920 audit, which is quite well progressed at this point, but we'll come on to that later, a question was raised with regards to the valuation of some of the assets. You'll probably be aware that the valuer that's being used this year is changed to a new valuer. And in comparing the valuations for the 1920 financial year with the 1819 valuations, a query arose around quite substantial movements in some of the inputs into the valuations around floor areas and the like. And it's taken quite some time to get to the bottom of what's happened there. Given the large variations in the inputs, and apparently nothing having changed at these buildings in terms of no huge extensions or anything of that nature, obviously one has to query, well, which one's right and which one's wrong. So whilst we're getting to the bottom of that, unfortunately, that means that the 1819 remains open in that area. And then finally, a matter arose a few months ago now, which led the finance directors to wish to gain some assurance from internal audit on a particular matter that might have bearing on some of our value for money conclusions. So we await the results of that in order to be able to conclude that point.
Do you want to comment, Julie, on or Sharon or Gillian on those issues? You're on mute, Julie.
Yeah, I mean, Sharon, do you want to start with that on the valuation, etc.?
Yes, I can say a few words about the valuation. We're advancing the issue. We have now received
Sharon, there's some problems with your audio. It's breaking up.
Some information back on previous valuation. So we have actually, we have actually sent that through to Andy Reid, the manager, and we'll take it from there. So I think with the valuation issues, we are in the process of resolving those.
Okay.
Yeah. On the assurance issue, I mean, it's something that's been raised in the context of the 2019-20 accounts, but potentially has sort of read across for letters of representation, etc. So we are just waiting at the moment for the conclusion of some internal audit work on that, which you know, frankly, I think if the valuation work had been resolved, the assurance piece wouldn't have delayed the accounts any further. But given that the valuation issue hasn't been resolved, we're just waiting for the conclusion of the internal audit work.
Okay. Have we got any idea of timescales in terms of when this should be finalised? Are we going to have it done for January, or is it possible before then?
Well, we're really disappointed we haven't got it for today, I have to say, because you know, the longer it goes on, as you know, as there is always the danger that further issues arise that delay things further. So all of us, I know Helen's really keen, Sharon and Gillian are really keen, I'm really keen just to draw this to a conclusion, and we really hoped that today was going to be that day, but it hasn't proved possible. Sharon, I don't know whether we can hear you now, but on the valuation issue, on that. I think Sharon's having connection problems.
Okay.
Certainly, my understanding, and Gillian will correct me if I'm wrong here, is that it's absolutely going to be resolved before your next meeting.
Okay. I think it would be useful if we could be informed, even though we may have to have a formal meeting to approve it and receive it, but if we could be informed when it's done and dusted, as it were, that would be helpful.
Yeah. And of course, the other issue is the CFO narrative, which is on the agenda. Again, that was something the 2019-20 looking at the CFO narrative for that identified that there were issues in the way in which the you know, that link between the financial statements and the management accounts, the way that work had been done. So we've reviewed that in the 18-19 accounts as well as the 19-20 accounts.
Okay, we'll come to that item in a moment or two. Anything else then on 18-19? Or Ian, sorry.
Yes, please. I suppose my question, I mean, it'd be fantastic if we could actually sign off the accounts before we have to change the narratives that says, do you remember when we had COVID? So I see it was like forget a post-balance sheet event, it was a pre-balance sheet event. But I think my concern around about the valuation piece is if there is a genuine problem and understanding how we arose at that, so when we find out which way it's right or wrong, Helen specifically, if it's a historic issue, what the implications are for that, not only the letters of rep, but every terms in terms of valuation, and actually if there's any liability or anything else. So I think I'm not going to prejudge. I'd just like to understand is the ramifications, if there is a significant ramification, or if it's just a revision of estimates, then it's not a problem.
Can I just jump in there?
Yeah.
I mean, my understanding is, and Sharon is having real problems, I think, with the technology, is that discussions with the valuers for 18-19 provide us with assurance that the 18-19 values are as they should be.
Okay.
Because we understand that there were visits made to properties and all of that sort of thing. So really, what we need to address is what's happened in
1920. Fine.
But we've got the assurance which we can share with external audit if we haven't already done so, that the 1819 values are as they should be.
Brilliant, Julie. That's great. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Jim, do you have a query as well on this? Oh, you're on mute, Jim, but and your hand's up. So
sorry, I've got to take it down after the last.
Okay.
Dual cardinal sin at that point, Jim. Dual cardinal.
Okay, shall we move on then to the current year, 1920, and another progress update, Helen, please.
Yes, absolutely. So the 1920 audit is progressing well. There is some overlap, as you would imagine, between the issues remaining outstanding in the 1920 audit and the ones we've already spoke about in the 1819 audit, not least the valuation of the assets. Just to give my perspective on what Julie just said around the valuations issue and where that lies. Obviously, until we started looking at the valuations in 1920, we were actually quite comfortable with the 1819 valuations. We had done work on those and gotten ourselves comfortable. However, the 1920 valuations effectively gave us contrary evidence, which can't be ignored and must be followed through. So I think in all likelihood, where we will get to is the 1819 valuations are looking like they're probably on the right basis and something's gone awry in 1920. That helps for signing off the 1819 opinion. It's not helpful for signing off the 1920 opinion, because clearly those valuations need to be reworked and effort needs to go into fixing those. So that's an area of the audit which remains outstanding at present. Somewhat related to that, you'll be aware of the South Park lease. That asset is now in operational use, and the code requires that it be valued at the point that it's brought into operational use. Now, when the draft accounts were pulled together at the 31st of March, there wasn't a valuation done on that asset. There was an understanding at the time that the county would do that at some future point and provide the valuation for the police to include within their financial statements. As it transpires, it would appear that that's not likely to be the case, and a separate valuation, I believe, is to be obtained. So there's obviously a delay in waiting for that valuation, and then once that valuation has been obtained, booked into the account, then we can audit that asset. In addition to that, with regards to the pension liabilities in terms of the local government pension scheme, you may or may not be aware that the part of the public sector audit protocols, if you like, is that the auditors of local government pension funds provide assurances, individual assurances, to the auditors of admitted bodies to enable, it's effectively a sort of money saving efficiency exercise to avoid things being audited twice and two lots of expense, etc., etc. I haven't yet received any communication from the auditor of the Lincolnshire Fund yet in terms of my request to them for assurance, so that also remains outstanding at present. It's fair to say Lincolnshire is not the only pension fund I haven't had assurances from my other clients at this point, but nevertheless, that's the situation. So they're the main outstanding items within the audit at the moment. It sounds a relatively short list, but actually in terms of what that means, effort side, both on the part of the finance team and ourselves as auditors, is that those matters need to be addressed within the financial statements themselves first. So a revised set prepared, then sent to us to complete, or in some instances commence, our audit procedures, and then we can start to form conclusions. Happy to take any questions on that.
Okay. Julie, Sharon and Gillian, any idea on potential timescales in terms of those outstanding matters?
I think my colleagues are both having real problems with the technology. I don't know if that's Gillian. Whether
Yeah, it's Gillian, yeah.
I'm with you for the moment. On the valuation of South Park at the moment, we're arranging for LCC's valuers, so that would be Kia, to undertake a leasehold valuation for us. And we're currently
liaising with them to ensure that's done. So I'm really hoping that's going to be before Christmas that we get that, so that we can feed that into the accounts pre-Christmas.
That answers my question. I was concerned we're going to be using the same valuer that we're having problems with on the rest of the property, to be honest.
No, with Kia having obviously inside knowledge of the property itself, freehold valuation, we thought it made sense for us to provide us
with the asset in use. Yeah, understood.
Jim, do you have a quick query? Your hands up.
Yeah, I mean, I think my concern is really that on the valuation, it seems like the figures were quite significantly different in 1920 to 1819. Shouldn't that have got picked up internally in the preparation of the 1920 accounts by the officers rather than the auditors?
I think that's probably part of what we're trying to uncover, because obviously we would have provided the new valuers with data in order for them to carry out their valuation. Obviously they visited the premises, so as part of the undertaking to understand how and where this has gone wrong, that's part of the understanding. But obviously whatever we've passed to them, we don't think has been fully utilised in the valuation. Something else has been brought into that process, which is what we're trying to get to the bottom of.
Right. I mean, we
would only provide them with what we have, and that's the same as what we've provided other valuers with. So
yeah, but one of the standard things when you're preparing the final accounts is actually do a sense check. Do I understand why the valuation of that property has changed from one year to the next? I'm just surprised that questions perhaps weren't raised 8-9 months ago when the values were first produced. But it's perhaps a learning.
Yeah, and it's something. Yeah, it's something we'll be picking up. We always do a post sort of audit review of how the whole thing went as part of bringing a paper to yourselves to this committee as well. So it is something that we will.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's kind of analytical review is a sort of external audit thing, but officers doing it themselves can probably pick up issues for officers to have a look at before it gets anywhere near external audit. Okay.
And Chair, we do that sort of analytical review. So you know, as Gillian said, I think we'll all be interested to understand when we look back at it. You know, where did this process fall down? If indeed it did.
Right. Any further questions on 1920 audit? Okay. Can we move on then to agenda item 14, which is related, which is the updated narrative for the 1819 accounts, financial statements rather. It wasn't clear to me what had changed. I don't know if you can say anything, Julia or Sharon, about what may have changed, but it wasn't obvious from the text what had actually been updated.
Yeah, I mean, what's changed is if we look at page 8, bottom of page 8, the financial performance section, and that trying to tell that story about, well, this is what appears in the financial statements, but if we you know, exclude certain sort of technical accounting adjustments, etc., you know, this is what the management accounts are saying effectively. And it became apparent when I reviewed 1920 that the methodology for that movement from the financial statements to the management accounts wasn't as it should be. It appeared to have worked okay in 1819 because I think there was some sort of compensating numbers, if you like, that you know, on the face of it meant that we achieved the control totals. But when I queried 1920, it was clear then that the methodology was incorrect, given that the 1819 accounts had yet to be concluded. I asked that the 1819 position be restated as well. So it's really clear now that we can start with what's in the financial statements. We can identify all of the adjustments that are being made within the financial statements, and then the management accounting information relates back to the budget report and the management accounts. So you know, it's really clear what from a layperson's point of view what the financial position of the PCC is.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from colleagues on the revised narrative?
Just a question, I suppose it's around timing, Julie. Are you going to put a date on the report?
Well, I mean, the report is, you know, for the 18-19 accounts, and it reflects the position as at the 31st of March 2019.
I mean, it was just in some parts of it, you talk about COVID, which was obviously 2020. But then if you go on page 6, we talk about South Park. And you say, well, it's due to open in autumn 2019. I just wonder whether we should either decide, well, we update it to, well, the point it's signed, or an argument, well, why talk about COVID if, you know, this is meant to represent what's happened in March 19?
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely take your point. It needs to be consistent, and I know Jim has previously raised that issue with me. What I'll do is I'll have a look through. I mean, it would be helpful perhaps if it started off with something about the timing of this report, that, you know, it's largely as at the 31st of March. However, given the delay in the audit, it reflects events during 2019 and 2020, you know, and just try and clarify which bits are as at 19 and which bits have been added in because the accounts weren't signed off effectively.
I think as well, Julie, from my perspective, the narrative statement sits within the financial statements document, so it is primarily a 31st of March 2019 document. The only reason for the addition of COVID is that that's effectively a post-balance sheet event that's reflected in those financial statements. Therefore, it makes sense to put it in the narrative that supports it.
And if I can say that in the narrative, that's why it's there, then that might be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Just a couple of things from myself. I had vague recollections that on page 8, which we talk about the gender pay gap, about asking for, some of us asked for comparators from the previous years. And I think this was a general point for these narratives, and I don't think there's anything about that there. There'll probably be a learning point for the future ones as well.
I think that may have been for, was that for 1920 you asked for that?
Probably. So if that's the case, then that's fair enough. And I did get a bit confused. Now, forgive me, because I haven't got a hard copy. Mine hasn't arrived, but I've had the online copy, which I don't have to hand. But on page 14, there's a table there outlining the financial position. And there's a sentence, I think it's the last sentence under the table, has the phrase current budget deficit of 5.8 million. And I didn't understand the 5.8 because I thought it was 5.1 from the table. That's on page 4. Again, sorry, I haven't got a hard copy to hand, but.
Yes, I'll go on.
Do you want me to read the whole sentence out under the table? So the table shows 5.1, and then it says the original budget showed a planned deficit of 5.1 million, which would be matched by a contribution of 3.1 million from general reserve and 2.0 million from earmark reserves. The final deficit was 4 million against a current budget deficit of 5.8 million. The reduction of 1.8 million was due to a number of factors, including but limited the following: under and overspend. So is it that the table hasn't been updated and needs to be changed to the new one?
No, I think what we've got here is the table showing the original
Budget.
budgets and the narrative talking about the final approved budget for the year that would have taken into account. So I'll make sure that we clarify.
Yeah,
that.
it's
referencing
it's just clarity, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Anything else on the narrative report? No? Okay, shall we then move on to agenda item 15, which there's various aspects to. Shall we try and take it as the 6? I see we've got 2 appendices, but there's actually 6 appendices there. Shall we just quickly go through each one and raise any questions or queries? So Appendix A is financial governance and performance. Have we got any questions or queries there? Anyone?
Sorry, Chair, for me.
Yeah.
Sorry, just on the table, on number 9 on the financial performance. It was using that really just as an indicator. When we have a look at actual capital spending managed to more than 80% of the approved programme, percentages I get. I'm just saying sometimes we just need to have a look about saying whether that's just contextual information in that table if you don't have the capital spend information to hand. You kind of have to start flipping around and start trying to find numbers. So I don't know how much of a problem percentages represent in terms of on here. If you're looking at it cold, does that make sense? It was just that when I read it cold, and it might be my fatigue brain, but when I'm looking at this, it's kind of saying how much of an issue is that? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're these are indicators. So if they're coloured red, then our view is it's an issue. These are meant to be sort of high level indicators, and I think from our perspective, what we're saying is to only be delivering 50% of capital spend, to within 80.
Sorry, Julie, I was going to say, yeah.
It's not helpful.
No, completely agree. No, I meant is that when we have a look at the capital program management. So again, if I read that cold, is if that's the total spend, or if you have 20 projects within that program, did you manage 57% of those 20? So 5. It's that sort of thing. Do you see what I mean? Rather than the total value of the spend, it's the number within that project that you manage properly. Because if you're only managing 2 out of 3 to accuracy, as opposed to you got one massively wrong, but it was the value it represented. That's what I meant about the percentages and just trying to give you that story. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's the narrative here, sort of. I mean, what we're looking at here is the total. We're looking at the total capital program, but total budget versus total spend.
Exactly. So it's about whether it's a systematic error or it's a one-off big blip. That's what I'm confused. That's fine. Thank you.
Douglas, do you have a query?
I just did on 16, Julie, on the last page. Is there a target against the extent of competition? I mean, we've got Amber there, but
well, I
think it's just following on almost from Ian's point and trying to identify, well, is this a problem or not?
I don't know. I'm just trying to think. I don't know if anybody can help me out here. I've got this feeling we must have a target, because otherwise how would we know it's Amber?
Yeah. Well, perhaps it just needs
again
in there so we know, well, are we miles off the marker?
Yeah.
That was it, thanks.
Okay, Jim, did you have one as well?
Yeah, very similar points on number 8, financial performance, 2 reds, and then last year only achieving 25%. I mean, should I really be alarmed? Is there something very concerning there, or is it just a poor indicator? If most of the budgets are, very small, £1,000, it doesn't matter if they're overspent by 50% or underspent by 50%. But if the budgets are all very significant sums, like hundreds of thousands, then it does matter. So the indicator is not really giving me a feeling of how alarmed I should be.
Well, I mean, maybe the 1%, you know, it could be refined. I think from my perspective, except that, you know, irrespective of the size of the budget, my perspective is if the budget holder is delivering on, I mean, you know, the budget is a plan ultimately, you know, wanting to deliver services for the public. We set out our plan at the beginning of the year. You know, there may be reasons why the budget isn't being delivered, because maybe we've achieved better value for money and we've been able to deliver the same services for less cost. But if what we're saying is the non-delivery of that budget means that we've had less of a service delivered to the public, then that for me is of concern, irrespective of how much money is involved in the particular budget.
Okay, perhaps, I mean, I accept the validity of that. Perhaps it's my lack of understanding about what's meant by budget. I mean, if the budget is, say, for police premises as a whole, then, you know, that's significant. But if the budget is the electricity bill for South Park Police Station, then, you know, to manage that within 1% is impossible.
Yeah, no, the budget is much higher level than that. It's as presented in the budget report, for example, so where it will say police officers, right, it was, etc. So
it's 24 or something heads, is it?
It's a bit more than that, but you know, it fits on a side of A4. Right.
Okay. Right.
Okay. Can we move on then to Appendix B Procurement? Any questions or queries on the annual report here?
Could I just comment back? It was interesting what Julie was saying earlier about the G4S, because it's just struck me a team of 2 is not very robust, and it was interesting as well. For the first time, I became aware of this blue light procurement, and it does seem to me that there is an opportunity there to make sure our arrangements are robust. What we need some sort of procurement support below the national level, and I suppose there's a debate about whether it should be national, regional or local, but hopefully in relation to the change in the G4S contract, we will be thinking about how that should work in, particularly in relation to the regional tier.
Yeah, and just to say that there are collaborative arrangements regionally for procurement, that we take advantage of the results of their work, if not necessarily being involved in their work, but absolutely areas all to explore.
Yeah, I know, for example, in the NHS, were very similar parallels. A lot of the procurements done by one health body, they would include all the other ones in the region, even though they had no intention of actually joining in at that stage. But if needs be, they could just opt in without having to go through a full tendering process, for example. So yeah, I'm pleased that there is that sort of regional liaison, and perhaps that can be developed.
Yeah, and just to say as well, rather like we were talking about the impact of Brexit on operational policing earlier on, in the fullness of time, I suppose we have the expectation of the impact on procurement, and you know, we look forward to that with interest.
Okay. Anything else on procurement? Okay. Can we then move on to Appendix C, debt recovery? Again, any questions, queries? It looked a fairly sound position to me, as in my reading. Any questions or queries? Douglas? You're on mute, Douglas.
Apologies. It was just on page 17, the various tables. I'm just not sure. Are there any sort of comparators? Because I wasn't sure whether, you know, the picture that we are seeing here is one to be concerned about. Are there sort of national figures or anything that might be helpful to put it into context?
So do you mean page 17, because that's insurances? We haven't quite got there yet.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, I've jumped ahead. Apologies.
So we're just doing C at the moment.
Sorry, apologies.
It's okay, Douglas. Are we okay with C? Personally, I am. Is that okay, Appendix C? If so, can we move on to Appendix D, insurance services? Again, so that would be your point then, Douglas.
Yeah. So sorry, I jumped to page too many. No, it was really just on page 17, these tables, and trying to get some feel as to is there anything that we could compare with, Julie? Maybe there isn't.
I don't think so. You know, people's insurance arrangements are very different, and I'm not sure what it would tell us. I mean, the whole point of this is to get some comparison over time, so that, you know, and also it's a sort of it's a process that potentially could be you know, isn't necessarily I'm going to say very transparent. This is about making all of this very transparent, because it's a process that in some ways goes on in the background. So that's the point of it really, and to do that comparison over time. And of course, you know, one claim can just significantly impact on the number in a particular year, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, I think in my experience, employers operate different levels of self-insurance and have different aggregates and excesses, and it becomes very difficult to have any meaningful comparison between. Yeah,
I mean, I thought that might be the case, but I thought I would ask the question because I mean, 152 public liability claims, you know, is that high compared with other forces? I just wondered if there was anything that might be useful, but I think the answer is probably it's not going to be easy to do. Okay, thanks.
Okay, Ian, do you have something? Question?
Yes, but I mean, the thing for me when it comes to public liability, it's to a large extent, I'm less worried about the numbers. It's actually the learning and about actually what the source of problems were for the claims more than anything else, and now they're incorporated back into the processes. So A, prevention of repeat, and B, more importantly, is a case of saying is what does that lead to in terms of picking the right type of insurance going forward. So I think that's probably more my my question for what I'm seeing on this table. Does that make sense, Julie?
Absolutely. And you know, there are a number of fora where these claims are discussed. I suppose at the top level we have what's known as the confidential risk board that involves people across the organisation, you know, legal, HR, etc., as you would expect, operational policing, finance, to understand the circumstances of particular claims and, as you say, what learning might be taken out of that.
So where would we normally see that in terms of from an audit and risk committee? Would we see that sort of translation anywhere? Obviously, like I say, most of that is operational learning, but again, it's that preemptive black swan moment that says actually we suddenly realised actually we're quite exposed, as we saw with a lot of the COVID policies, for example. You know, pandemics weren't covered in an insurance policy.
I'm not sure whether you ever receive any. I mean, obviously you wouldn't have an update on the confidential risk board because by its nature the issues, you know, the risks on it are confidential. But I'm not sure whether you have any visibility at all of the fact that it exists and that it meets and who's involved. Probably not, I think.
Well, I think we know that because it does get explained in various cases that its existence, but we obviously, as you rightly say, don't have and probably don't need to know the detail.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's translation into the risk register and translation that's fine. I think it's a case of saying is if there's any connectivity from what we're seeing on this table through to the risk register. I just think if that happens, let us know rather than you don't have to tell us specifically. I think it's probably what I'm asking.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. these are the sorts of things that are discussed at the confidential risk board potentially, if you know,
Yeah.
if it's of the right nature.
That's fine. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, can we move on to Annex E, which is the annual Treasury Management Review? Any questions or queries on that? Again, I thought it was fairly straightforward and self-explanatory. In an interesting year for that sort of activity.
Yeah.
It's certainly one for the banks.
Yeah. Okay, can we then move on then to Appendix F, which is Corporate Finance Team Performance in 1819. Again, this looks relatively self-explanatory, but any questions or queries? Section of the agenda to agenda item 16, which is the mid-year report on Treasury management for the current year. Again, have any of my colleagues any questions or queries on this fairly comprehensive report? I suppose the one question I had, Julie or whoever, was I noticed that maybe it'll be relevant today, maybe not. The Treasury have been reviewing the PWLB margin, and there's some suggestion that they may be reducing that. I just wondered if there was any idea of timescale for that, because it looks to me like you've not done any borrowing this year in the expectation that perhaps that's going to fall. Or is it 1.8% over gilts at the moment?
Yeah, and I mean, I think we haven't done any borrowing because, again, you know, some of it about the delivery of the capital programme, you know, and also, you know, COVID has impacted on all this sort of stuff. So I think whilst there's uncertainty, I mean, we're conscious of the need to, you know, the profile of the, lost for words, but you know, at the moment our profile of when the maturity profile is very end loaded, and we're conscious of the need to spread risk a bit more. So at the moment, I think whilst we're, you know, reasonably cash rich, which is what we are, and whilst there is still uncertainty around the delivery of some of these major items in the capital programme, we're just hanging on basically.
Yeah. And you've also got substantial internal borrowing, which presumably will be unwound at some point when the time's right as well.
Yes, I mean, what I've asked for, because I'm not sure that it ever really comes out in these documents, is something that gives a better indication of our cash position, because our cash position is heavily impacted by the pensions money that we get. And of course we don't budget in, I mean, we now are starting to include it in the budget as a sort of memo item, the pensions money, because, you know, effectively we're paying out to police pensioners, and Treasury give us that money mostly up front. You know, it's front loaded, so for most of the year we've got the money from pensions, and that, you know, that really finances our cash requirement for most of the year. And when you look at something like this report, what you're seeing is the underlying funded position, if you like, as opposed to that pensions position. So I'm hopeful that we can include something in a future report that gives you a better idea, because really there's only about 3 months of the year when we're cash poor, frankly.
Yeah.
David, may I just
Yes.
comment? Thank you. Julie, completely. I love this paper, by the way. I think it's great. It's one of the more intelligent, well-written, comprehensive reports I get out of all the packs I get in the year. I love it. It's really interesting. I'm glad you raised that about the insight piece, because again, some of the things, just as a couple of suggestions, I've done that before, where you strip out where you've got distinct cash flows within the year. And you say you got your pension, and you kind of remove the distortion. So you kind of you get the total picture, then strip out the pension, strip out the things that are front loaded, whether it's profit commissions or whatever, and then you're left with essentially that trading cash position. And again, when you start having a look at that, as if the first two are effectively funded anyway, it's just timing, get rid of them. And then you start, that ties into, like you say, some of the borrowing requirements and about some of the scenario planning. And you can have a look at that. Sometimes that works really well in a picture. You don't need the narrative to go alongside it. You can just show that ebbs and flows of trading over and above that distortion of front loaded cash amounts, capital, all that sort of stuff. So I think for me personally, that'd be great. But that would be an enhancement to what I already think is a really good paper as well.
Okay, thank you. So Julie, you could also, as we've just been talking about, add an appendix which was a maturity profile as a kind of standard appendix, just showing when all the borrowing does mature, because presumably it's mostly maturity debt which will have to be refinanced, so that would be useful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Long after my time, I'm sure. But,
yeah.
but that's not the point, is it?
No. Absolutely not. No.
So when we come back up for our second stint on the JIAC, at that point, really, I thought I got rid of this. Exactly.
Okay. Are we happy then with the Treasury Management mid-year report? Can we then move on to agenda item 18, excuse me, which is the balance sheet report? Do you want to say anything, Julie, about that, or Sharon?
Sharon's, oh no, she looks like she might be back. She keeps messaging me. She can't hear anything, and she's really struggling. So, I mean, I don't think there's anything that I want to say on it really. I mean, I other than to say this is probably still a bit of a work in progress. You know, we're still trying to get to the point where we've got a good view of how the balance sheet is going to be moving over future periods, but you know, we have made progress, but I think, you know, we will keep working at it effectively.
Okay, any questions, queries from colleagues?
I think it's a good start. I really do. I think it's nice. I think, Julie, your points are well made about doing this one. The only thing I'd just ask is on page 1, when you start saying that the total value is increasing by 10 million and 1.5 is other, a 15% other makes me a bit jittery. And I'm not expecting it to go down to minutiae, but again, it's just getting people to think about that context, that the smaller projects, well, okay, a project is an individual project is not greater than X. It might be a high volume of small values, but no project's greater than X. Just gives me that little bit of context as a cold reader. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, just, you know, the capital budget paper will have that in some detail. So
it is. It's about referencing. It's just that connectivity.
Yeah.
I think just that bit, the linking, that'd be fun. Thank you.
Okay. Shall we move on then to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 19, which was the paper that came out yesterday from Julie, and basically giving us the work programme action plan for the finance review. Do you want to say anything about that, Julie? I know it's been delayed because of COVID.
No, that's what I was going to say. Really, I'm personally disappointed that you know, here we are, and we're just sort of agreeing the action plan. But you know, I mean, it's felt like a perfect storm this last year with, you know, the accounts being delayed and then COVID and so on. But there is a real opportunity here for us. Again, it's linked to the decision on G4S to set out how we want the finance function to operate going forward. And that's sort of reflected, if you like, it in the timescales, because you know, actually setting out what we expect finance and procurement to be doing, and then, you know, how we can structure it and so on to deliver all of that, you know, is helpful. So, as I say, just a bit of you know, personal disappointment. Actually, we're not further forward with it, but Sharon and Gillian and I are committed to delivering this.
On that basis, can we expect progress reports? Because it's basically throughout next calendar year, a lot of the deadlines mature, so progress reports would be helpful.
Absolutely, and that will help us as well to you know, to be held to account by you all. Okay. On delivering it. It will be very helpful.
Okay, Douglas, do you have a query?
It's Julie, it was just, is that the total extent of the action plan, or is the action plan, are there still further actions? I suppose my question is slightly related to the number of issues that have been raised in the report. Are we comfortable that the actions we've set out here are sufficient to address the issues that are shown in the report?
Yeah, I mean, this is the extent of the action plan that was in the report. In the report, it looks longer because a number of them are repeated more than once, which I discovered when I started trying to fill the matrix in. I thought, well, this all seems very familiar. So I think there's some drafting issues with the draft report. I think what we'll need to do is when we're delivering on the actions, we'll need to go back to the report to make sure that we're covering off all of the issues that relate to the action that were identified in the report, because the resolution, if you like, of a number of issues might lie in one action, and we just need to make sure that in addressing that action we address all those underlying issues as well.
Okay, that's good, thanks. Thank you.
Anything else on the finance review? Okay, thank you. Can we move then on to agenda item 20, which is the PCC's risk register? Is there anything you want to say, Aubrey, about this update?
No, it's a fairly straightforward covering report, so there's nothing I particularly wanted to add, but I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, have we got any questions? Have you got one, Douglas, or is your hand up from the previous? Sorry.
Chair, if I may.
Yes. Yes, Bill. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. It's just to say that following the decision in relation to the G4S contract, that clearly the force in the Commissioner's office will kind of review the risk scoring, and it's not quite risk one. It's probably a different articulation of that risk. So I don't propose to offer any view on the risk scoring of the transition arrangements, but it's certainly something that will have to appear and be scored over the coming weeks. And it may come out as lower, it may come amber, it may come red. I don't know at this point. That will be for others to kind of assess. But it was just to make that point that that's something that will appear on either this risk register or jointly with the force register.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Bill. We did actually have a chat about that general issue when you were absent there under the sort of update for the 4GS, and my personal view was that there's a lot of very high risks potentially in the change that's being proposed, and I'm sure they will appear in the register. Any questions? Tracy, do you have one?
Yeah, I just wonder if this is an appropriate time looking at resilience and instability in the Force Chiefs Officer team. I know, Bill, you're counting down your days, 23 days to go. I just wonder, could we have an update on what's happening with your replacement from somebody? I don't mind who, anybody would do.
I suppose that's a great question, but I'm not sure who is actually in a position to answer, because it really is the Commissioner. What I can say from a force perspective is that we have, as forces up and down the country have got, is contingency arrangements should a Chief Constable be absent for any kind of period of time. So if there is from the 19th of December onwards any kind of gap in my replacement, then a natural arrangement of temporary and acting up will take place, and that's a discussion that is fairly routine and is ongoing. In terms of the timeline for the announcement of the next Chief Constable and the actual date which they take up the appointment, I don't know. That really is with the Commissioner, and I don't know whether Julie's in a position to give any further views on that.
Julie?
Yes, I mean, I think there was an advertisement, there was a process. There is an expectation of the police and crime panel have to hold a confirmation hearing where the Commissioner goes forward with his proposal around the appointment, and the Police and Crime Panel review the evidence and produce a report on that. I think the expectation is that there will be a confirmation hearing sometime around the middle of December, so in advance of the 18th of December. And at that point, as that confirmation hearing, takes place and the date is set, etc., no doubt more information will be in the public domain.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Do you have something, Ian? You have hands up? Please.
No, Aubrey, you will pick this up. And by the way, magnificent beard. I remember when I seen you clean shaven before. That's fantastic. The issue for me really is around what the Chief Constable has already said is the connectivity between risks. We've got the G4S, we've got the senior staff. The ripple effect onto other risks is important. We just need to reflect on that as well, where there is that knock on and the collective total. That's something I'm intrigued about, was the collection of a lot of these risks. When they start stockpiling, actually the critical mass starts to cause other problems. So when you're reflecting that back, I'd like to hear that in the narrative as well, as where we start seeing the ripple effect, please.
Yeah, certainly that'll be a consideration. And just in terms of why a lot of the risks that we've just alluded to around the G4S contract, etc., haven't appeared in this particular report, is the announcement about the contract was on the 10th, and this was updated just prior to that, around about the 6th. So a lot of the conversations that you've alluded to, Ian, will be taking place in subsequent meetings.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anything else on the PCC risk register? Otherwise, let's move on to the penultimate item, item 21, which is the PCC and Chief Constable's risk management strategy. Aubrey, you're the author here. Is there anything you want to say by way of introduction?
No, it's a fairly routine update. The only sort of outstanding or pending issue that will need to be addressed is when the fraud risk register is actually rolled out, then that'll need to be incorporated into the strategy. But at the moment, it's a fairly routine update.
Okay. Do you have a time scale for that, potentially?
At the moment, no. In a word, I think it's been temporarily paused while we review the format of it, because of recent conversations that have taken place in the steering group.
Okay. Anyone, any questions? It looked all fairly straightforward to me on that item. Okay, shall we press on then to the final item, which is the forward plan for our own work programme. There, I don't know if Gillian's able to say anything or not say anything. We'll plough on anyway.
I'll try.
If you want to try then, Gillian.
So I've extended the forward plan to January 22. We might not have dates, but I have put the months in, so at least we know what we're planning to do when. Tried to be really clear about versions and which years of items are going, because obviously it's all a little bit confusing at the moment, so I've tried to be as clear as I can. And the other thing to say is that we are trying to get the self-assessment of the committee just scheduled in at a separate time. I'm waiting for Mark to give me some dates when he's available, and then we can liaise with the committee to get it done, because I think it's just drifting now with people's availability after today. Couldn't do it today, so we just need to get it separately sorted out. I think stop trying to tie it to a JIAC meeting day.
Would be useful, because presumably only going to take an hour or so. If we could probably try and get it done before Christmas. Yeah. So that
I agree. Yeah.
If you just let us know some dates.
Will do.
And I think there's a couple of items that we've deliberately moved from this meeting into the January meeting, isn't there? Just because of the weight of business.
Yeah, because it was two meetings combined this time, and we just moved a couple of items just into January. Just try and spread it out, and they're reflected on the plan. Okay.
Any questions from anyone then? Oh, Ian?
If I may, whilst I'm not quite counting down quite as rapidly as Chief Constable is that I believe my tenure will expire at some point. Knowing how much fun we had in terms of securing the brilliant guys we've got now on top of me, when do we need to start having a look at this? Thankfully, they compensate for me quite quickly. Just the lead time, because I know it is quite a challenging exercise. Are we thinking about that as well if you go into 2022?
Because I think from memory, you were September and Jim was November, I think.
It was very rapid order within exactly. There's only a couple of months between me and Jim.
Yeah.
And like I say, I just remember how it was an
I've made a note of it to put some time aside in January to. It was.
Okay.
Just remind me when I'm going to expire as well, if you'd be so kind, Gillian, at some point. I'd just like to know in advance. Thank you.
Okay.
I don't want to turn up uninvited and unappreciated. You know, it's fine.
Never.
Okay.
I do that regularly as it is in my life, so it's fine. Thank you.
Jim, do you have something?
Yeah, just a reminder that earlier on in the discussion, we decided to add a confidential item about the G4S contract transition arrangements. We wanted to pick that up for that meeting.
We will, I'll add that.
Yeah. And perhaps as a standing item even for the next year or so.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else from anyone? Okay.
Can we have? Sorry, David. If we could have them in the right order, in the Morecambe and Wise sketch, it's all the right papers, not necessarily in the right order. Approach to the agenda this time was quite challenging, and if we could have them a little bit more in advance, that would be superb as well, please.
Yeah, noted. Jim, you're on mute.
One other similar point. On glass cubes, it may be my unfamiliarity with the system, but they didn't come structured in a logical sequence. The appendices were all over the shop. I don't know if there's a way of publishing them so they actually run in order.
Yeah. Okay.
Julie's finally worked away to confusing us even more, so she's finally sussed out how to do that.
It might be sticking them in a folder called Appendix C's for report 1 or whatever, but the problem is I think that glass cubes probably just sorts out the papers as you stick them on. They probably just all come on whatever order you put them in. It's like Dropbox, you just have to put them in a separate folder.
Right.
Technical things.
Or else put them on in the order in which they're appearing on the agenda. And then,
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Okay, can I
I've
then
got to go, people.
Draw the meeting to a close, and while you're on, just thank Jim for his support for the Internal Audit Committee over the last few years, and to wish him all the best for his future endeavours and whatever form those may take. So thank you, Jim. Bill, sorry, Bill.
Bill, I was going to say, Jim, did you know you're going?
Jim going? Did I miss something?
Bill, you can go. We don't care. But Jim, we're giving you a year's worth of thanks just in advance.
Okay, right. The meeting is now formally ended.